You can click here to watch our previous episode on this channel about AP Malphite. I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I think you guys might enjoy it if you haven't seen it yet, so click here to go check it out after this video. So I was about 90% of the way done with this video, ready to release in a couple of hours, and naturally, Riot changed the Riven buffs on the PBE, and I have to start almost all the way over. So to that I say, Riot, you can suck my... At the moment, the PBE is full of some pretty crazy and exciting new things. First off, we have amazing new weeb skins for all of you Nami lovers out there, and I'll say it doesn't really look like Nami that much, but in case you're wondering, here's the skin. The ultimate does look pretty cool though. We also, of course, have a new Morgana skin, and I'll say this one looks a little bit more like Morg to me, but overall it's not as nice as the Nami one. We also have Eternals, Riot's new stat trackers that you can buy for RP that let you know things like how many times you've killed people with your ultimate on a Kali, or how many times you've hit people with your max range VIQ. And finally, we have balance changes. This is the current list of changes that we're looking at, and, well, it's pretty crazy. The Fiora buff is huge, allowing her to completely ruin towers and be arguably the best sieger and split pusher in the game. The Blitzcrank buffs are also massive, increasing his range on his Q, and the Orianna buffs are no joke either, and she will probably see a lot more play at Worlds. But nothing will get Reddit in a firestorm more than a good old Riven buff. So let's talk about it. Right now, here is the current buff. Is this a coincidence that they're buffing Riven? Well, no, not at all. And that's for two reasons. One reason might be what Riot lists as their official public response, as quoted from Riot King Cobra for their reasoning for buffing her, and while it's true, objectively, some of her recent rounds of nerfs, she's doing worse than she was doing before because her win rate is down in every single elo, her play rate is down, and her ban rate is down. These things standing alone are not enough to convince me that a champion got weaker because of a nerf. It's just apparent that overall she's doing worse, but that's saying a lot considering how broken she was before. The magnitude of the changes is more than certainly up for debate. If you want to say that Riven is still giga broken and is S++ tier, you are entitled to that. If you want to say that she's weaker, but still very strong and potentially worth banning, right around A tier, which is pretty much where I stand as well, you can say that too. Or, if you're a bronze Riven main, and you say that she's terrible and needs buffs because you can't get out of bronze, all valid viewpoints to be honest, you can say that too. I would say my current standpoint needs a bit more time to develop. I'm not honestly sure if Riven really needs any buffs right now because she was literally the strongest champion in the game for most of the season, which means that after a nerf, I really need to truly know if she needs to be rebuffed. Which takes us to point number 2, which is the very real and obvious reason she's receiving buffs, because Riven has a new skin, Valiant Sword Riven. On top of being a pretty cool skin, though I have to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of the splash art because, again, it doesn't even look anything like her, but okay, it's still pretty nice. She also has a Prestige Edition skin. Ah, there's the meat and potatoes, boys. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. With the new buffs and a new Prestige Edition skin, I'll be giving a comprehensive review of both of them in today's video. Naturally, let's start with the skin. Valiant Sword Riven by default is priced at 1350 RP, meaning it's a moderately expensive skin, but not the most pricey. She has all new animations, including a new auto attack animation, and a very nice recall animation, which is something that I value quite a bit, and new sounds. However, it comes with no new voice lines, laughs, dance, or taunts, which I know is somewhat typical for this price range of skins, but sometimes if Daddy Riot spoils us, these 1350 skins will have a few new voice lines. For the Prestige Edition, here is a side-by-side comparison of the regular versus Prestige, and overall, I'll actually be honest, I think it's one of the better ones that they've released. I think she actually looks different, which is saying something because a lot of the other Prestige Editions are just glorified chromas that cost $100. One thing that every Riven main is a bit scared of when a new skin comes out is how does it feel to play. I promise I'm not trying to sound like a Riven elitist or a redditor, trust me, so I'll go through this quickly, but sometimes just some of her skins feel really wrong to play, the best example being Arcade Riven. For whatever reason, whether it's the sounds that the skin makes, the animations, or the color schemes, that skin just feels awkward and clunky to play, and there is a reason why you're typically not seeing Riven players use that skin. For Valiant Sword, I would say it's fine, though at first there was a slight learning curve to the skin, though I'll say that could be because of PBE lag. However, after a couple of games, I got used to it, and the new sounds and the new ultimate animation I do typically like. Finally, one more note that again is very specific to Riven, but it should not sway you away from buying the skin, is that she stands a bit differently and positions her feet a little bit different, and normally this wouldn't matter, it's kind of like who cares. But for a very niche thing that Riven can do, which is these harder wall hops that require these pixel perfect accuracies and where you have to stand is very important, I noticed that it kind of threw me off just because of the orientation of how the champion is standing. Again, this is so unimpactful, and being honest, I couldn't even tell you the last time that I used one of these wall hops in a real game. I just had a harder time getting into the right spot because of the stance. However, for everything else considered, for 1350 RP, and if you consider all of the other Riven skins that are 1350 RP, such as Dragonblade, I think if you compare those two, this one is definitely worth a buy, and it's pretty cool. This is a pretty cool skin line. I like the Janna one, I like the Fiora one, and the Master Yi one, so it's all along that same line, and I think this one does a nice job of continuing that. Alright, let's talk about the buff. The original buff that she was going to receive had to do with her damage. Ki Burst was getting its ratio increased by 30%, whereas Windslash had a base damage buff, but in compensation for the buff, there was a small nerf that the lower the target was, the less effective that the execute damage would be. However, straight buffing the W's damage was very dangerous because we were dealing with bonus AD ratios, and this would not affect Riven's early game that much where she arguably does need help, rather instead make it so when she snowballs, she would really snowball, which is bad, that's just bad design. Instead, now the buffs are a two-part change, and to start there is a direct nerf to her Q, increasing the cooldown by 1 second, but then buffing Valor's cooldown to lower it by 2 seconds at all ranks. Just reading this by itself is fine, but Riven does tend to buy 40% CDR every game and get it as fast as possible, so if you want to assess these buffs properly, I would say don't look at it with 0% CDR because it's not necessarily accurate. I tested the live values and the changed values on the PBE at level 13, where you can max out your E both with 20% and 40% CDR to give you an idea. The live server Q is nerfed around a half a second longer, going from 7.2 seconds to 7.6 seconds. However, the E is buffed by about 1.2 seconds, lowering its cooldown from 6 seconds down to 4.8 seconds, and of course these numbers skew more the lower amount of cooldown that you have. This buff, if buffing Riven is what they decide that they are going to do, I would say is kind of in the right direction. Right now, Riven's main problem is her laning phase, and she has a lot of matchups that she simply cannot survive. Renekton was given a shield breaking mechanic on his W, Kled was given anti-healing, Poppy not only interrupts dashes but also now grounds you. Kennen with Kleptomancy is her hardest counterpick, and he can earn like 700 or 800 gold throughout the game from Klepto. Fiora's numerous buffs makes it a favorable laning phase for her as long as she takes Grasp of the Undying. Singed was buffed several times and that guy is 1v9, and I have no clue how you beat an Urgot after level 9. For people who hate Riven and don't play any of her counters like Renekton or Kennen, I would say these buffs are probably worth bringing back a ban for her. I would say if you do play her counters though, and feel pretty comfortable against the champion, and you're able to set her behind early, I honestly wouldn't worry about the buffs too much. Without a doubt, she's stronger, and I think the E maybe doesn't need to be lowered to 4.8 seconds. Again, there is a Q nerf, but the value of having a late game shield come up 1.2 seconds faster is definitely going to be better than a 0.4 second nerf to the Q. I think one optimization that a few Riven players are starting to take is to take sorcery secondary more often, and this has been working pretty well for me too. Although 45% CDR is great, I think that sorcery with Transcendence and Gathering Storm to get even more AD is probably just better. There have been a couple of 30-minute games that I was reaching more than 500 or even 600 AD because Transcendence into Gathering Storm add up to be like 50 AD. And with a newer build, which we will get into in a second, it's a very AD heavy build. These types of things are always funny to me. It's so obviously aligned with the skin release, and it's so obvious that Riot is doing this for money. Yet, we continue to play the game. It's like a personal disconnect that I have with this game. On one hand, Riven really didn't need buffs. Not yet anyway, at least not in any time soon. I still need time to assess her and feel out her current stance. I'm not completely convinced that she's so weak that she needs buffs. I actually think the new crit build is pretty darn good. A lot of Rivens have been using Essence Reaver and Spear of Sojin, and I would say it feels solid. On top of that, it's only been a couple of weeks since the nerfs. It's not like it was 6 months ago. I found that I was able to survive matchups that were more unfavorable on the PvE because I got 2 seconds back on my shield at level 1. So those poke lanes like Kennen that absolutely murder you just aren't going to be as potent and might allow you to scale up to get your items. I think the thing that keeps Riven balanced in the mid to late game is that you need to be able to punish her when her shield is down. And if the shield is more than a 5-second cooldown, which it is right now, I think that although she's not the most fair champion to play against, it's definitely a lot easier to kill her. It's more common that you'll see her use her shield and actually be able to punish her for it. And while you do lose a slight amount of wave clear because your Q cooldown is going up, you will definitely appreciate a 4.8 second cooldown shield, and that's at only 40% CDR. Imagine what you get if you go 45%. It's very obvious here that Riot is choosing money and greed over balancing the game correctly, and that's not really that cool. But, I mean, on the other hand, that skin though, dude!